Hi, I'm Fred
and Wendy Nunes,
and welcome to Nunes Vineyard. So when you're dealing with the grapevines, Vitis vinifera in particular here, you have to understand the life cycle of that vine in order to try to influence it or direct it towards this idea that we're creating color, flavor, and aroma, and that we need to influence the vine at certain parts of its cycle. So in the very beginning, in the springtime, we start bud burst on March the 21st, and the vine will start to grow. So there's not a lot we can do at that point except protect it from frost and to protect it from powdery mildew. So at that point, the vine's very susceptible to powdery mildew, so we spray sulfur and copper on the vine. And because the vine is still very young and fragile, we have to be very careful of the structures that the vine is producing. So in early April, the vine starts to grow, and the vine naturally grows in a tree. So its morphology, its shape, the direction of the vine is genetically pushed towards getting into the sunlight. So when the vine first starts growing, the primordia is a layer of tissue in the vine that the year before was determined whether the vine is in the sunlight or not. That primordia now starts to express, and it expresses in a structure called the apical meristem, and it's like a deck of cards. So you've got the bud on the cane that starts to bud burst, and the first leaves come out. Well, that apical meristem, as it starts to extend out, it'll drop a card, and that card will be either a tendril, fruit, or a leaf. And depending on the amount of ultraviolet light that the vine is sensing, the vine will ask itself, am I in a tree? Am I in the foliage and I need to climb out? In which case the next structure that comes out will differentiate into a tendril and try to climb its way out of the canopy of the tree to get up into the sunlight. If it's in the sunlight, the next card that comes out will say, oh, we're in the sunlight, so we're in a good position, we'll make fruit. So that next card comes out and it makes an inflorescence that's going to become a bunch of fruit. So if it is in the sunlight, it'll create the fruit, and then every card after that, it'll start to create another set of leaves that's going to eventually make the nutrient that the fruit is looking for to make color, flavor, and aroma. So now we've got the plant extending out one structure at a time in the early spring. And there's not a lot that we can do to influence at that point other than to make sure that it doesn't dry out. If we have a drought year like this year, we had to put the water on a little bit earlier to keep the root ball from influencing the vine and maybe turning it too early. So we want to keep it growing green long enough to produce enough clusters of fruit to be economically viable. So as the plant is growing and it creates this inflorescence that will become the actual bunch of fruit, during about the next 25 days, that inflorescence, it looks like a miniature grape bunch with a bunch of BBs on it, very small. The plant is monoecious, meaning that it has both sexes on the same plant. So you have a structure that forms like a BB, it's got a cap on it called the calyptera. And in about 30 days from its first bud burst, the calyptera will dry up, it will spring-loaded, unfold and fly off in the wind. The flower now will open up, the grape flower. It has 5 stamens and pistils on the male part of the plant that surround the stigma and style. So these 5 filaments with an anther with pollen will pollinate the center of the stigma, and that will create a pollen tube that will grow down to the seed that's inside the structure. This is all the size of a BB now that this is happening. So that pollen tube will stimulate the seed to grow. Once the seed starts to grow, it will create enzymes. The enzymes will cause the filaments and the anthers to fall off of the flower, and now the ovary, if you will, the stigma, will start to swell, and that will eventually become a grape. And that happens over the entire inflorescence in about the first 30 to 40 days of the growth cycle of the plant. The idea that over-vigorous vines are counterintuitive. They look real pretty. You walk in the vineyard and everyone says, oh, look how green the vineyard is. It's absolutely beautiful. And that's true. But the problem with that is if you look at the physiology of the vine and what it's doing, in the early part of the growing season, the roots are sensing springtime. And once the temperature gets to a point where the plant is going to initiate its growth, the roots will start creating gibberellic acid, which is an enzyme that's going to stimulate the grape plant to grow. It's going to tell the cells to divide and elongate. So now the vine starts to grow. Now we get about 60 days into the growing period, and we need that vine to stop growing. Counterintuitive, yes, but what we're doing is we're taking the reservoir of precursor compounds that are going to change into color, flavor, and aroma. And if I get a little scientific here, those compounds are methoxypyrazine and hydroxycinnamate. With oxidation, those two phenolic compounds will change into flavonoids, non-flavonoids, and anthocyanin, or color, flavor, and aroma. If the vine continues to get the signal from the roots to continue growing, it'll just keep making more methoxypyrazine, more hydroxycinnamate. When we come into the winery and we have high concentrations of those compounds, the winemaker now has to come up with a way to oxidize those into color, flavor, and aroma. So he's going to put it in barrels, he's going to age it in barrels, he's going to put it in a bottle, and now it becomes reductive chemistry, or without oxygen. And now all those phenolic compounds that have changed to flavonoids and non-flavonoids and anthocyanin are starting to link together or polymerize, and it's going to create long chain polycarbons in the bottle. So the winemaker has a lot of influence over when these occurrences happen, and eventually will determine the character of the wine. So in the beginning, we want the vineyard to grow green, create the precursors. Right about mid-growth season, about 60 days into the growth cycle, I'm going to pull the water back on the vine so that the root balls get a sense of drought. Once they sense drought, the root ball will create abscisic acid. That abscisic acid will go up into the vine in the phloem, and it'll go throughout the entire vine and tell the vine, stop cell dividing, stop cell elongating, and just sit there. And now for the next 60 days, dependent on the temperature, will determine the rate of how fast this oxidation happens, and these precursors are going to change slowly into color, flavor, and aroma. So that now, at the time we are now, about 120 days into the growth cycle, the winemaker will go into the vineyard and they'll start tasting the fruit, and they'll look at the seed coats to see if they are turning brown and they're no longer green. And we'll start getting a lot of flavor, we'll start getting a lot of color, and then the winemaker will determine, based on his style of wine, whether to go a little earlier and have a little more of that green character in it that he's going to oxidize in the barrel, or is he going to wait a little later and let those compounds oxidize to color, flavor, and aroma more in the vineyard and bring them into the winery where they will be more phenolically developed, higher thresholds of flavor, color, and aroma.